Hello and welcome to the March 8th edition of Ukraine Without Hype. I'm Anthony Bardaway, here with Romeo Kokratsky.
Hey, folks.
Our last episode dealt with the deteriorating relationship between the United States and Ukraine, and the United States and the entirety of the free world as America slips quickly into fascism. And unfortunately, this episode will have to deal with the continuation of that story. There are other news happening in the world, but really America abandoning Ukraine and everything else really is the top billing. We are covering this on the Ukraine Without Hype feed, but we are also going to be getting more into our project of Radio Free America, dealing more with American news that is coming up within the next few days as well. So since the last time that we had our episode, we had the very infamous now meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump in the Oval Office and all of the horrendous side effects that have come from that. So we're going to be going through this in a chronological order because we see everything going very badly very quickly. So the first thing we had is that before this meeting, the Republican messaging on Ukraine was getting far more bellicose, far more aggressive, saying that the Ukrainians need to surrender, saying that there needs to be elections, basically continuation of everything that we were talking about in the last episode. Don't need to go into a catalog of every horrendous thing a Republican said.
I mean, honestly, guys, our sanity would not survive watching Fox News for longer than 5 minutes at a stretch.
Yeah, and everyone had to get their 2 cents in. But as that was going on, there seemed to be what turned out to be fake breaking of some of the rhetoric going on at the top of the Oval Office. Donald Trump, after calling Zelenskyy a dictator, said, "Oh, did I say that? I don't remember saying that." There seemed to be a gathering on this mineral deal.
Because he has dementia, Anthony.
Yeah, that he probably just has dementia. He is an old man. One thing I noticed during the election is that Trump and Biden unfortunately had 2 different types of dementia. Biden just had the type of dementia that meant he couldn't talk anymore, but neither of their brains work good no more. But during all that, there seemed to be a breakthrough on this mineral deal. So the initial demand from the United States was give us half your stuff in perpetuity. Well, this renegotiated mineral deal seemed to not have too many solid commitments in it. The United States did not get... It was more of a first call on mineral rights more than anything else. While the Ukrainian side did not get the wanted security guarantees, but it looked like it was about to go forward, and Zelenskyy made his trip to the United States to what a lot of people thought would be to put the final stamp on it. Kind of not what anyone really wanted, but would turn down the temperature of the rhetoric and the actions coming out of America and hopefully keep this all going.
So the mineral deal, by the way, is not... So everyone keeps talking about this, and I've been interviewed a couple of times on this, and I've had to make this point every time. There is no mineral deal. That is, the minerals under discussion are theoretical at best. These are not easily accessible or readable deposits. In a lot of cases, these aren't even confirmed deposits. These are theoretical deposits, or if you are willing to be a little cynical, non-existent minerals. Now, I believe the history is that the Zelenskyy administration actually came up with this idea because the Zelenskyy administration has long been aware that Donald Trump is a transactional man. He wants to get something for something else. Unlike we would hope most Democratic leaders, Donald Trump believes that there is only zero sum in this world, and if you gain something, I necessarily have to lose something. So the Zelenskyy administration kind of drafted this idea of, well, maybe we can sort of bribe him with these minerals, and as a result, Trump may be more predisposed to take our side.
Or more specifically, it was presented as lend-lease. If you help us, we'll consider that as a loan and we'll pay back that loan with our minerals. That's kind of how Zelenskyy framed it as.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea. But of course, it was working on the incorrect theory that Donald Trump is not a paid Russian agent. Donald Trump is a paid Russian agent who has no interest in helping Ukraine in any way, shape, or form, because Putin is literally the man who pays him and holds all the blackmail, which Ukraine does not. So the mineral deal was never going to be a thing. The stated reasons for Zelensky's meeting were not actually true. Trump's stated reasons for meeting with Zelensky also not true. From Zelensky's side, this was an attempt to kind of size up one of his opponents for the foreseeable future. Donald Trump's actions by now, and we'll cover them in quite excruciating detail in a bit here, but his actions have clearly proven that he has no interest in helping Ukraine. And Zelensky, I think, was absolutely aware of this. And as I argued in a recent op-ed, his goal for this meeting was not actually to sign the mineral deal. That's all just diplomatic niceties. The same way China and Russia have signed an unlimited partnership deal, and yet China still abides by U.S. sanctions on Russia, or at least partially abides by them, which is more than one would expect when one presumably has a quote-unquote unlimited partnership deal. So as a result, Zelensky was hoping to see what he could get out of Trump, if anything. But more than that, I think Zelensky wanted to show Europe who Trump was. And there was quite frankly, no better way of showing who Trump was. I don't believe for a second he emotionally reacted to Vance's words. Zelensky is literally a professional actor. I do not doubt for a moment that he has a sublime ability to hide or display whatever emotions he wants at any given time. That is one of the things actors do. And he did not have to respond in the way that he did against Vance's attacks. So instead, what Zelensky wanted to do was show Europe who Trump was. And that's exactly what the ambush at the end of that meeting showed, that Trump was not someone that Europe could reliably negotiate with. Anything you talk about or sign or any agreements you come to with Trump will be rendered null and void, basically at whim. This is not a partner you can work with. That was the point of the meeting, and it accomplished its point. We've seen Europe, and we'll go a little bit more into this in a second, but it worked. Europe has absolutely, I think, recognized the risk that they're now facing from both sides of the continent. And the whole kind of scandal, Zelensky showed himself to be ungrateful or whatever, that's literally just propaganda.
Yeah, so we'll pause on that. We'll pause on that and go over what this meeting was. I'm sure many of you have seen this by now. It's been all over every news source that exists. But essentially what there was a 40-minute long meeting in the White House. It was much more staffed than usual. The ambush was obvious. These meetings that Trump has often had with world leaders, it's usually just been him and his counterpart. Many of these meetings between Trump and other world leaders have been designed to humiliate them. With the King of Jordan especially, it was kind of like basically telling Jordan, you are ours, don't act up. And King Abdullah kind of nodded along with it, as did many other world leaders. The British have been really trying to placate him, but the Ukrainian team pretty much knew what was happening. There was lots of warnings about what would happen. Reportedly, the U.S. envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, gave a warning himself, which is kind of disappointing considering his more recent actions. But at the end of this meeting, it led to an argument that was prompted by Vance, though Zelensky came ready for it. I believe some people, maybe Zelensky had an outburst, maybe it went as Romeo said, as he recognized it, but essentially this was always going to happen. There was always going to be a point where the U.S. would abandon Ukraine, considering the stated policy goals of the Trump administration. Vance was saying this whole time. We have Musk, who has been doing everything that Musk has been doing. Don't need to get into the details of that because there's a new nonsense that comes out of him every single day.
And we will cover that on Radio Free America.
Yeah, that's for the other pod. This was always going to happen, but this way was, we kind of had discussions about this between ourselves, and this was kind of the best way that could possibly happen with Trump and Vance just having an emotional breakdown in front of the cameras, just having this absolutely disgusting display by the press corps surrounding them. It wasn't like a it wasn't the frog in the boiling pot of water situation of everyone having to gradually accept worse and worse from the U.S. Having it all happen at once was really the best way that it could happen in as bombastic a way it was possible. So no one could deny, unless they chose to deny, what happened. And with it, at the end, Zelenskyy was forced out of the White House. There were supposed to be further meetings for their press conferences. Those are all immediately canceled. They got on a plane and headed for Britain to continue their diplomatic tour. And since then, it has all kind of gone to hell, expectedly. The Republicans have continued talking all kinds of nonsense about Ukraine. Ukraine is not grateful. America holds all the cards till it's, Zelenskyy said, we're not playing a game here. All these little sound bites that Trump said, the Republican press knew exactly how to do that, of taking those sound bites and expanding them and repeating them ad nauseum day after day, because that's how effective propaganda works.
By the way, it was Trump literally saying, I trust Putin, and Ukraine frustrates me because they don't hold any cards. That is just a thing that the U.S. president recently said.
Been continuously saying that Putin really does want to have peace. Putin is much, much easier to deal with. But as this is all going on, I need to make this completely clear. Russia has continuously stated that they do not want peace talks. So
they also explicitly, a day, by the way, before the Oval Office meeting, they explicitly said that they will not negotiate with Zelenskyy. They are willing to negotiate with Ukraine. However, not with Zelenskyy.
Yeah, which has been another one of these talking points, is that they need Zelenskyy to go. We'll get into some
weird how all the Russian propaganda points keep getting repeated by the U.S. press.
So after this, Europe kind of saw what they needed to see, and they really began to rally around Ukraine more. This has, happened in the past. Europe has talked a big game many times in the past. Macron specifically has raised all kinds of proposals and plans to help Ukraine that never really followed through with. There's a lot of big talk and not as much action. But what we're hearing from a lot of sources within European capitals, from within the European Union system, is that this time they really do seem to mean it. They really do seem to actually recognize the threat from Russia, and more importantly, that America will not have their back anymore. And not just not have their back anymore, but could be actively hostile in some kind of future conflict. We covered this a bit in the last episode, where we talked about how there does seem to be a very specific plan from the United States in order to boost pro-Russian forces within Europe. Surprise, surprise, how everything America is doing is completely in line with what Russia is doing, down to the exact people they want to work with, including the AfD party in Germany, the Nazi party in Germany. Both the United States and Russia are backing them at the moment, though the recent German election has shown that that was not as successful as they wanted it to be.
Seems like there are less Nazis in Germany than there are in the United States at the moment.
Does seem to be the case. So we've gotten all kinds of statements from leaders, though, as always, the important ones are France and Germany, so we'll just cover what France and Germany have been saying. France, Macron, to quote him, Europe's future should not be decided in Washington or Moscow, and yes, the threat from the East is returning, and the innocence of these 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall is over. And the incoming German Chancellor Merz, in view of the threats to our freedom and peace on our continent, the rule for our defense now has to be whatever it takes. So this old line of as long as it takes has been replaced with whatever it takes. And now this is all just messaging, and words mean about as much as the paper they're printed on a lot of the time, but it is a significant shift in what those words are.
And there have been some actions. For example, the EU is now seriously considering an actual militarization bill. Various minor parties would propose them before, of course, in the EU Parliament, though they would never even be tabled for discussion. They would just be ignored because it was always seen as quite a crazy thing in Europe to propose greater militarization instead of less. However, now the EU is debating 800 billion euro defense plan. Defense funding, current funding is around 350 billion. So this is more than double what the EU is currently spending on defense. And in addition, the French government has proposed an expansion of its nuclear umbrella to other EU member states. That is, Macron has told other EU members that they are willing to host discussions on the expansion of the nuclear umbrella to them as well, which, for example, Donald Tusk in Poland has been very vociferous about promoting. He has, in fact, said that Poland is working and shall be working to gain not only nuclear weapons, but whatever new tech and new weapons are available. It really seems, according to everything we can see, that Europe is truly waking up to the risks and the threats that it is facing.
It's a new Europe out there. It's a whole different world from what it was last year. One more statement that I found fascinating from French Senator Claude Meloret. The Senate is not the main French deliberative body, but it was a great line, so I have to say it. Washington has become Nero's court, with an incendiary emperor, submissive courtiers, and a jester high on ketamine in charge of purging the civil service. We were at war with a dictator. We are now at war with a dictator backed by a traitor. So yeah, it's happening. But during the course of all this, the United States seems to be offended greatly by Europe focusing on its defense. Now, for as long as there has been a NATO relationship, the Americans have often complained that the Europeans are not pulling their weight. This has been a frequent complaint by Donald Trump especially, is that Europeans are not spending the amount of money that NATO treaties say that they should be spending on their own defense. There has been statements from him saying that if you do not pay the appropriate amount for defense in NATO, then America will not honor its Article 5 commitments. Overall, the stated policy of the Trump government has been that Europe does have to become more self-reliant, but now that it has, that also seems to be making Trump mad.
What's the old meme? No, not like this.
No, not like this. It seems as though Trump was lying about everything this whole time. Shocker.
Trump?
Yeah, shocker.
Donald Trump uttering a falsehood with his own mouth and voice box?
So yes, the United States has gotten very aggressive about this. They have demanded that the Europeans arm themselves only with American weapons, and it does not look like that's about to be the case. If you look at the stock markets, a lot of American defense companies, their stock prices have been falling, while European ones have been climbing at truly obscene rates, because investors seem to understand that the German companies will getting much more business than the American ones in the near future, because you can't trust the American ones.
Yeah, for a exact example of this, the Americans have reportedly disabled a GPS targeting system used by the HIMARS weapon system. That is a weapon system that was functioning perfectly fine yesterday, suddenly has been turned off at the whim of a foreign government. This is, quite frankly, unacceptable to any nation that uses foreign-bought weaponry. At the very least, you have to ensure that no one can mess with your ability to use the guns that you own.
Yeah, you don't want someone else being able to turn your weapons off remotely for you. That could be very bad in a war, as we're seeing now. And from Vance specifically, he gave a line referring to how the British and French were saying that they commit troops as peacekeepers following a deal. Vance said that 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 to 40 years is how he referred to this offer. And that's deeply offensive, because Britain and France have followed America into war many times, even when they very much did not think it was a good idea. The only time that Article 5 of the NATO treaty, referring to collective defense, has ever been activated has been with the American war in Afghanistan, which many British soldiers have died. Many other coalition of the willing in Iraq and Afghanistan soldiers died because America wanted them to come with and do dying alongside them. This has led to not only outrage in Europe because, a world leader cannot allow their soldiers to be insulted so directly by a foreign leader like this.
By the way, Ukrainians died in the coalition of the will. Over 18 of them were killed as part of the war, and over 40 were injured. Not only Europe, but Ukraine itself helped at least a little bit with when the United States asked for countries to join it. Ukraine was one of them.
And that was a very unpopular decision by Ukraine at the time, made by an unpopular government in order to mollify the Americans. And how did that turn out? Americans are ungrateful. So this whole time of the United States, of Trump and Vance and all these pundits saying that Ukraine's not grateful for the help that's being provided, it turns out America actively denies that anyone has helped them, including Trump making another statement recently saying that if Article 5 had to be activated, he would not expect America's allies to follow through on that. Unlike, as I said, America is the only country that has used Article 5 protections. So lying about horrible things. But in the background of all this, something strange has been happening. There have been a lot of lower level American officials trying to act as though this could all be smoothed over in the near future, that there could be a signing of this mineral deal. Zelenskyy, I'll get into in a second, said that it was still on the table as far as he was concerned, though the higher level American officials have denied it. You have seen these lower level diplomats trying to say that everything could move forward. We have seen the British especially trying to act as though that this could all be stitched back together and everyone can just be happy and friendly again.
Mind you, that was before Trump said on on Thursday, as of time of recording, that he now wants Ukraine to unilaterally disarm, or at least commit to a unilateral ceasefire before any mineral deal could be signed.
It has gotten more extreme. They have presented this framework of
unilateral ceasefire surrender.
Yeah, is a surrender. Because once again, not only are they not making any demands or threats against Russia to come to the table, but Russia has repeatedly denied that they will come to the table at all. They have repeatedly denied that any of the proposals put forward for peacekeepers or anything like that could ever be acceptable on their part. They have completely stonewalled this entire process. Meanwhile, the American government is talking about removing sanctions from Russia. So America's working with Russia. America is working with Russia.
That's what happens when you elect a Russian agent as president. And then your country starts working with the guys who pay him.
And so, as I said, Zelenskyy was part of this, trying to mend things together. He made one statement on Twitter. I'll try to quote some of this, saying that I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. None of us want an endless war, which was, by the way, one of Trump's statements, is that the Ukrainians just want to fight this war forever. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We'd like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. This was on the 4th, which was Tuesday, before things got even worse than they are now. This statement also included a proposal to have a ceasefire in the air, where Ukraine would cease its long-range drone and missile attacks on Russian targets within the Russian Federation, and in exchange, Russia would no longer do missile attacks on deep behind the front lines in Ukraine as well, on residential areas, on energy infrastructure, etc. This has been offered several times in the last year, and every time Russia has said no. This On Zelensky's part, this was an obvious way of showing that the Ukrainians are the ones willing to make peace and the Russians were not, because that is the case. And knowing that it would, of course, be denied by Russia and, of course, be denied by the United States as well.
They've cut off all military aid. So prior to, after Trump's election, there were still a bunch of scheduled and planned aid deliveries, military aid deliveries to Ukraine that the Biden administration had authorized. Those deliveries were still going after Trump's inauguration and were still going up until the U.S. And Trump completely froze all military aid to Ukraine, including stuff that had already been paid for, had been appropriated by Congress, and were waiting in pallets at loading zones in Poland. That stuff has also been frozen in place. In addition, the U.S. has committed to no more military aid to Ukraine. They've conditioned returning military aid as on the start of quote unquote peace talks. And they've also decided to stop sending additional equipment for our power infrastructure. So that's so those are the things that the Trump administration has done militarily. So when it comes to this military aid, I don't believe the impact on the battlefield will be that extreme. However, the impact on the rear will be even worse. One of the kind of main forms of aid, or the most effective forms of aid the U.S. has been sending us, are the Patriot weapons batteries, the Patriot anti-air systems, as well as ammunition for those anti-air systems. Now, Trump can't exactly get the Patriots that are already here back. We're not going to send it back to them. However, he can say that we won't get any more missiles. A lot of the NATO munitions used by the donated equipment from Ukraine's partners, those are manufactured in Europe, and it is at least possible that Europe can still provide those munitions and parts for systems and so on, even if the U.S. opposes it or doesn't agree. However, with Patriot missiles, this is a completely different story because, quite frankly, the only place that makes them is the U.S. Patriots are the most effective anti-air system, anti-missile system, bar none. The most modern Russian systems don't even come close to the interception rates. If I remember correctly, the interception rates for Patriots are estimated something between 94 and 96%. That is incredibly high. For comparison, the interception rates for the modernized Russian S-400 interception system is somewhere in the 60s, I believe. And of course, the older Soviet systems function even worse. Now, most of the missiles that Russia shoots here are not aimed at frontline concentrations of soldiers. They are aimed at the Ukrainian rear, at civilian installations, at power facilities, at civilian government buildings, and so on. Very often at malls and markets and random bits of street, also random houses and random apartment buildings. So the inability to properly be able to intercept the missile strikes, and the Russians have also seen or have adapted to the increasing lack of Patriot missiles by Ukraine by including more missiles in their mass attacks. There was one of the largest mass attacks of the full-scale invasion so far just a few days ago, where I believe it was something like 30 or plus missiles of different types were fired at once, accompanied by about 100 drones. The less ability we have to intercept those things, the more they're going to kill people. That is honestly the biggest threat here, is that our ability to defend our civilians, to keep Russian missiles from slamming into cities, has been severely, severely degraded. And that degrades the rest of our anti-air capability as well.
What that has meant in real practical terms, Romeo just mentioned this massive missile attack. These attacks have been nightly since the beginning of this diplomatic crisis. Before, they'd be frequent, but really every single night almost there have been drone attacks. There was one that was about 2 blocks away from my own apartment that the drone got. My rule don't follow this rule. Do as I say, not as I do. When there is some kind of alarm, I generally ignore it and go about my life as though there was nothing happening, with the exception of if I visibly see a drone coming towards me, as in I hear the sound, look out the window. Do not look out the window. Do not ever look out the window. I'm a crazy person. Look out the window, see the drone, see the anti-air fire being targeted at that drone. That is when I decided to actually go to my hallway for safety. So it's been an intense week or so. But what the Russians are going to be doing in the near future is that they now know that there is a finite amount of Patriot missiles that Ukraine has in its stockpile. We don't know how much that is. The Russians don't know the exact number of what that is. But whatever it is, it's finite. It is not being replenished unless there is some backroom deal happening to acquire more Patriot missiles. Once those are out, Ukraine is very, very vulnerable to missile attack. So Russia wants to exhaust that supply as quickly as they can before alternative solutions can be found. It's going to be a rough month, is my prediction on that. Also, the humanitarian aid that has already been canceled included aid that helped repair the power infrastructure, which means that if Russia hits a power plant or a transformer or something that allows Ukraine to have electricity, it will be harder to repair it. It will be a tough summer and things will get much worse unless the Europeans can figure something out.
And in more bad news, the Americans have also cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. U.S. intelligence has been incredibly effective in helping Ukraine identify and target vulnerable spots in the Russian rear. It's been an incredibly helpful factor in holding back Russian assaults because the United States has the greatest signals intelligence interception capability in the world. It's very likely that there is very little that the Russians say that the Americans don't know about. And having that information was possibly even more helpful than some of the actual military aid they got. But now, Ukraine, of course, is not allowed to use U.S. intelligence, is not getting that intelligence. As I mentioned earlier, they shut off the GPS targeting for the HIMARS systems. That doesn't mean the HIMARS system is inoperable, but it just means that it cannot be used to its full capacity in the ways that it's intended to be used.
Other targeting data has been shifted to, from what I'm hearing, is that they're finding other solutions. They aren't dead in the water now. It's just harder.
Yeah, exactly. And the U.S. has actually gone further than simply cutting Ukraine off from its military intelligence. In fact, the U.S. has ordered commercial satellite companies to cut off intelligence. We've had confirmation that commercial satellite imagery company Maxar, which both analysts and the government and the military in Ukraine have relied on heavily since basically day one of the full-scale invasion. I've been seeing Maxar satellite images even before that from 2014. It's been a incredibly useful tool. But Maxar told Ukraine that it has been ordered by the administration to no longer offer its services to Ukraine. Now, I'm sure this is a commercial company we're talking about. I'm sure getting around this is as simple as starting a shell company in Cyprus and getting a new contract.
Which they already do with Russia, by the way. They have been told not to provide services to Russia, but they found ways around that as well.
Yeah, in fact, there have been growing concerns about Ukrainians that the kind of increasing precision, one of the reasons for the increasing precision of Russian strikes and the rising body counts is because the Russians have access to U.S. commercial satellite data. So far, we only know that they can access U.S. commercial data. At the moment, as of time of recording, Trump has not yet just given the Russians U.S. intelligence as well. Thank God.
Well, that we know of.
Yeah, that we know of yet. And on top of, as the kind of cherry to this garbage pie, the United States has, or rather the Trump administration has ordered the United States military to cease all cyber operations in relation to Russia. Now, I've commonly seen this reported as simply offensive operations, but I have also seen reports that claim this applies to defensive operations as well. For those that don't know, the Russian Federation has, for quite frankly, decades run various propaganda and psychological operations in the U.S. with the intent of growing pro-Russian sentiment and minimizing pro-Ukrainian sentiment. And now it's very likely the Trump administration has told the U.S. military to just let that happen. So all in all, not great.
This dropping of American defenses, that is happening in many different ways. So most of the way that the end of U.S. intelligence sharing to Ukraine has been reported is that it is a loss for Ukraine. But intelligence sharing goes in two directions. And the Ukrainian intelligence services, as we should all understand by now, are extraordinarily effective, extraordinarily professional. They really can get the job done. And this one story that ran in the New York Times last year kind of detailed the creation of the modern Ukrainian intelligence services, about how after Maidan, the Americans did not trust Ukrainian intelligence because a lot of Ukrainian intelligence was really just an extension of Russian intelligence at that time. They went to the same schools. They could not be trusted, which is why the SBU has largely been sidelined to a large extent during this war in favor of the military intelligence, because in the post-Maidan world, the SBU was seen as more corrupt, more infiltrated, less reliable, while HUR...
Not just seen.
It absolutely
was. We've had numerous high-level SBU officials arrested for basically spying on Russian behalf.
The reason why Kherson fell in the first place was because the head of the Kherson office of the SBU was bribed by Russia and prevented the blowing up of the bridge into the city. It's a troubling organization, but part of why HUR, military intelligence, was better is because it was not as important beforehand, because they don't deal with economic crime. They don't deal with money, really. And without money, there's not opportunity for corruption. Nobody wanted it who was going to be corrupt, which allowed HUR to be rebuilt with a lot of help from the CIA in exchange for the CIA gaining a lot of intelligence from them.
And mind you, a lot of people, like we've been talking about U.S. intelligence. I mentioned how the U.S. has the best signals intelligence system in the world. I think that's undisputable. But I think people often forget that the Ukrainian espionage, like Anthony just mentioned, the Ukrainian intelligence community is a direct descendant of the KGB, just like the FSB is. Those archives contain the same documents. There is possibly no one better equipped to understand the mindset of the KGB than a Ukrainian HUR or SBU official, because quite frankly, those used to be the same thing. We have quite possibly the best insights into the Russian security state and the Russian security mindset than anyone else on earth. And if you are planning to take actions to oppose the Russian security state, like, for example, Europe, or prior to Trump's election, the United States, it probably behooves you to make good friends with the Ukrainians.
And one point that was made in that New York Times article was that if a Russian spy were to be recruited by the Americans, that would be a huge shame. It would be a very big deal. But, you know, if a Russian intelligence agent had a nice little chat with a Ukrainian one over tea on some beach in Cyprus, that's just a little chat between old colleagues. The Ukrainians were far, far, far more effective at recruiting Russian assets, at penetrating every element of the Russian security state, as we have seen from a lot of these attacks by the HUR and deep into the Russian Federation, including Moscow itself. They go very far. And therefore, if America wants to confront Russia, wants to have any kind of defenses against Russia, the HUR, the SBU, are key parts of that, as Romeo just said. However, it seems as though America's not interested in that. And so this intelligence sharing can be shut down. And one way that I saw this as well is that one thing that we're seeing from the US is that this much vaunted deep state, this military industrial complex, this group of spooks and spies behind the scenes are able to do anything. They really haven't been doing anything so far, have they?
Almost like they don't exist, Anthony.
They most likely don't exist. There's no deep state. There's no anything like that.
I mean, imagine a Turkish president telling the Turks that Turkey will be withdrawing from most of Europe and giving their territory back to the Greeks. The guy would be assassinated like barely before he had time to finish the first sentence of his inauguration speech. Like, other countries do have deep states. We've seen them in action. It's just the U.S. that doesn't.
Conspiracy theories taking the L on this one. But one thing that a lot of intelligence services do is a lot of it is kind of informal. It's between agents between different countries. There are high-level cooperation between things like the Five Eyes, which is basically the combined intelligence services of the different English-speaking countries.
Except for Canada, which has now been forced out.
What America's doing right now, it's eliminating all of its defenses specifically against Russia, but not just, which is the kind of thing that one would do if you want Russia to attack the United States.
In fact, the Trump administration has signaled that they are looking to withdraw from NORAD. NORAD.
Oh my God.
Literally the foundational aspect of U.S. defense and security infrastructure. For listeners who may not be aware, NORAD is a joint radar program run between the U.S. and Canada that provides basically complete cover of both Canadian and U.S. airspace. It is so critically important to U.S. security that the only possible reason anyone would ever have for shutting it down is if you are looking to invite a foreign adversary, conduct a strike on American soil, or perhaps if you are planning to conduct a strike on Canadian soil.
They also track Santa. They're the guys who keep radar on Santa so that you know when Santa's going to show up to send the kids to bed. Also a very vital service provided by NORAD that will no longer exist. But other ways that America has been dropping its defenses against Russia in a more economic sphere is that one thing that Russian oligarchs do to hide their money and be able to spend it where they want is invest in real estate, which is kind of why Trump is so tied to Russia, is that the New York real estate market is largely an elaborate money laundering scheme for Russian, Chinese, etc. oligarchs. And to be a big-time real estate developer in New York is to almost by definition be involved in Russian organized crime.
Again, by definition, this isn't an exaggeration. It's simply a fact of how the construction business in New York City works.
That's just how it goes. Everyone knows how it is. America has eliminated the anti-money laundering laws that would require people to declare who the actual ownership of a piece of real estate would be, which means that you can just do completely anonymous purchases is what they're going for.
And by the way, just as a quick hint, Anthony, you'll probably cut this in editing, but if you ever run into a building and the ownership of it is hidden behind a shell company, guess what? That building isn't owned by anyone. You can do whatever you want to it. No one will ever show up to stop you, because who are the owners? If the owners do show up, make them prove it. Anonymous properties with anonymous ownerships are effectively abandoned.
Now, we're not telling anyone to do anything, just pointing out some facts. So in all these other ways involving American financial crimes and all kinds of lists of things have all been dropped, not only to allow American oligarchs to loot and pillage the American economy, but also foreign ones, namely Russian ones. Which leads us to now our last direct action taken by America against Ukrainians, which is we've covered this in the past, which saying what would happen very directly is that refugee protections for Ukrainian refugees are now ended.
Well, technically, they are now in flux. Though, yes, in practical terms, they've been ended.
Yeah, I don't have any faith that someone will come in at the last second to save it, because if there's one thing that this administration hates more than Ukraine, it's refugees and trans people as well. So this is going to happen. I said that Trump's anti-refugee policies would not only be affecting people from Latin America, it would also be against Ukrainians, even though Ukrainians have received a bit warmer of a welcome in the U.S. in the past than a Guatemalan, for example. Well, that all ends. So we're looking at 240,000 Ukrainians potentially and very likely being deported from the U.S. back to Ukraine or to a third country. That's a lot of people.
I just explained why Trump is doing this. And it's not just his hatred for refugees and Ukrainians. It is also as a bargaining chip. This is like a 250,000 Ukrainian lives who fled into what they and everyone had assumed was a safe, welcoming country, just like immigrants have gone to America for, quite frankly, since the founding of the state. However, with these actions, so first they leaked that they were going to cancel the temporary protected status. Then they went on and had a press conference where they said they are not doing that. Then there was another leak from another official that said they're only considering doing that. And the reason they are saying all of this is to force Zelenskyy to capitulate. They are currently doing this specifically to weaken Zelenskyy's negotiating position and to pretty much blackmail him with the lives of 240,000 of his citizens. That is the reason they are doing this, even more than their just generic anti-immigrant, like hate and xenophobia. They are doing this specifically to mess with Zelenskyy. And speaking of messing with Zelenskyy, there have now been reports that the United States is in conversations with some of Zelenskyy's political opponents here in Ukraine.
Yeah, so how this has been going on is that throughout all of this, the Trump administration has presenting Zelenskyy as the number one obstacle to peace. Again, reflecting Russian propaganda, saying that, all of these Ukrainians, they secretly just want to make peace with Russia and submit to Russian rule. It's only this Zelenskyy and his group of Nazi, Jew, homosexual fascists who are preventing the Ukrainians from doing what's in their souls they want to do as naturally submissive Russian subjects.
Yes, we want to kiss the Russians' toes. That is all a Ukrainian has ever wanted. The entire history of our nation is just to find a Russian and just suck on those toes.
And that is now how Trump is presenting it, in that the Ukrainians are being stubborn and it's all Zelenskyy's fault. If only we can replace Zelenskyy, everything will all fall into line. Exact mirror image of Russian propaganda. And I'm generally concerned right now that America will attempt a coup, and I'll lay out my argument for that right now. So they've made this argument that Zelenskyy has to be replaced, and now what they're doing is that they've actively begun looking for replacements. They have held talks, apparently, with Petro Poroshenko and Yulia Tymoshenko. Now, these talks didn't go anywhere and probably won't go anywhere. I have my criticisms of Poroshenko. He's not a traitor. He's not going to gain the utter hatred of the entirety of the Ukrainian people by organizing a surrender to the United States and Russia. It's not his thing. Yulia, I also don't see her doing that. And beyond that, neither of these people are especially super popular. If in polling, because polling is still ongoing of who everyone supports in the country, basically there is a competition between Zelenskyy and former commander of the armed forces, General Zelenskyy, who is currently the ambassador to the UK, and everyone else is somewhere below 10%. So in order for there to be some kind of replacement of the government, no one is there. There's no one else. And Zelenskyy doesn't want that either. Like, he's never said he wants to be president. He's kind of intimated that he was looking forward to a political career in some way, but he is a hero of the military and all that. It's not he is more nationalistic. He is stronger on a lot of issues in regards to Russia, and maybe not as charismatic as Zelenskyy is, but we don't need to get into the presidential debate there. But there's no vote, there's no popular support that could lead to anyone replacing Zelenskyy. It just doesn't exist.
Not to mention the whole constitutional angle of it, in which Ukraine still cannot have an election during war. There is no legal method to replace Zelenskyy. Even if you convinced one of his opponents to stand as a opposition candidate, what is that? It doesn't mean anything because, again, we don't have elections during war.
Yeah, we've made this argument last episode. We had a whole episode on it last year, or 2 years ago, or year before last year. At this point, we've made this point ad nauseum. There cannot be elections, and if there were elections, it would be utter disaster for everybody and be illegitimate and all that. However, I don't think that Trump is going to take the answer of no lying down. I think that they will become more and more aggressive with it. They will continuously look for somebody who may take their deal, and I don't know what they'll do after that. So the whole conspiracy theory about the Revolution of Dignity, about Euromaidan, was that the American State Department organized this coup and America chose Ukraine's leadership. That did not happen. That's all nonsense.
I mean, mind you, this was sorry, just to interrupt quickly. This was literally a conspiracy that Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State, repeated on the podium in his official capacity as Secretary of State. That is, it is the official U.S. position that the Maidan was a CIA operation to force Ukraine into a proxy war with Russia on America's behalf. That is the official current position of the United States government.
Yep. So they believe that this happened, which means that they think they can do it again. However, that's not what happened. Before everything happened, we were working out an episode about how Euromaidan actually played out in recognition of the anniversary of Euromaidan. This whole bunch of nonsense kind of pushed that idea backwards a bit. And so we can explain that in a later episode, sometimes maybe this month we'll do it. Who knows? But that was all nonsense, but they think it happened. Therefore, they think they can do it again. They truly believe that Ukraine is just a colony of America, that it is meant to follow America's orders, that it has no agency outside of the American imperial demands that can then be negotiated with the other imperial power of Russia. That is how they view the world. That's how they view the world, not only in relation to Ukraine, but also in relation to Canada and Mexico and Panama and Greenland and whoever else they threaten next week.
Oh, we'll be talking about Canada a lot on Radio Free America.
That is how they view the world, and that is how they are acting, and I believe that they will try. However, one thing here is, as we've been talking about this whole time, as America is slowly destroying its state apparatus and its intelligence agencies, and I'm not sure if the State Department even exists anymore at this point. There's no mechanism to do this, but they'll try some funny business. That said, there are some Ukrainians who are at the top of my list for wanting to be on the other end of this deal. We have Arestovich, a former advisor to the presidential administration. He wasn't really, but at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, he was the guy who gave a lot of news updates from the presidential administration. So we got popular that way. Since then, he's declined into irrelevancy and becoming a crazy guy ranting on the corner.
Well, that's because he fled Ukraine to avoid criminal charges.
Yeah, he's a criminal, but he has changed his social media status to presidential candidate, so they might scoop him up to try to do something. And the other one is Alexander Dubinsky, a former member of the ruling Servant of the People Party. Again, a criminal a traitor. He is currently detained for treason, but this whole time he has been appealing to the U.S. His whole thing is make Ukraine great again. He is trying to make himself the pro-Trump, anti-Zelenskyy politician. And fishing for some kind of support from the United States before now, just to spring him from jail and get his charges dropped, if you're hoping that America can apply him enough pressure to save his skin. Now I think he might be aiming for the big role. Like I said, though, this is all America is going to have a very difficult time doing this if they really intend to do it.
Yeah, these people have literally less than percentages of support in Ukraine. The only possible way to bring them in power would be an actual coup, but I don't even know what security forces you would use for that coup aside from Russians. And the whole we don't have Russian security forces in Ukraine is the reason for the full-scale invasion. So I am not sure how they really foresee this endgame playing out.
So that is what America has been up to in relation to Ukraine in the last 2 weeks since our last episode. The world, as we know it, has been completely upended. Now is the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters, and there's a lot of monsters out there right now. But we're closing off that episode by saying Ukraine could use the support. As always, you can go to our link tree for various ways to support Ukrainian charities and find information from Ukrainian sources. I've been saying more and more that this is more important than ever. It really is important than ever. If you would like to support Ukraine Without Hype, please tell your friends and family about us. We need that information into the world. We need to build a resistance in America to these horrendous fascist policies of the Trump administration. And one way to go about that is to arm yourself with information. If you'd like to support Ukraine Without Hype financially, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Ukraine Without Hype. That is what allows us to continue this project and hopefully grow it into something larger. For example, with our new podcast that we'll be working on much more in the future, Radio Free America, bringing a more accurate, de-propagandized view of America from here in Ukraine. So please support us there. That is now its own podcast feed as well. So if you can subscribe to Radio Free America, there are a lot of Radio Free Americas out there. It's not a super creative name in that, but it is the only one that's currently active and not QAnon. There's a weird Radio Free America podcast is their full name. That's not us. They're a QAnon podcast. We are just Radio Free America.
Yeah, we actually believe in democracy and human rights and are not conspiracy poisoned like psychos. So listen to our Radio Free America.
You can also go to a new documentary that I voiced at Kiev Independent about the flooding in Kherson caused by Russia blowing up the Kakhovka Dam and their efforts to block aid from getting to people on the Russian-occupied side of Kherson Oblast at that time. This is from the War Crimes Investigation Unit at Kiev Independent. You can also go to New Voice of Ukraine, which is the main news outlet that Romeo and I work for. We are currently building up our selection of premium content, video content, that kind of thing at New Voice of Ukraine. So you can also go to patreon.com/NVUA to support independent Ukrainian journalism from a larger newsroom over there. So to thank our patrons at Ukraine Without Hype, thank you very much to Deborah Grazer, Randy McNerlin. The voices in my head are from Big Pharma, Arminius, David Shepard, Giorgio, Ivana Kratskaya, Michael Drucker, Mike, PLM, Anonymous, Barbara, Dennis Napalm, Devi, Dimitri Litvin, Elizabeth Hughes, James Burke, Jan, Yanara, Jenny Louise, Kathy and Brent Irvine, Kevin Alberton, Kyle Smith, Marguerite, Megan, Michael Wickman, Nick, Silas Frank, T. Bart, Vivek, Abel Lenz, Aidan McDonald, Alex Scrochwell, Anastasia, Andrew Glenn, Can Dystopian Fiction Please Remain Fiction, Captain Tentacle, Chris Bennington, Christopher Yee, Dan, David Wall, Demetrio, Denna Jones, Dish Taco, Emily Bavona, Etienne, Evelyn, Francois, Grace Krause, Had to Laugh, Jacob Holm, James Wise, Jared Bradley, Jared, Julia Lindsay, Justin Devendorf, Justin R., Hick Acetron, wonderful name, Kiki Valley, Kyle Johnson, Laura De Leon, Laurie Halila, Lemonikin, Levy Grove, Marianne, Matt Miller, Melissa Caselco, Anonymous, Noah Brown, Noam Hart, RDK, Sanjay, Scott Berry, Got Turkey Hooks, Stuart Akers, Subtle Knife, Ursula, Veronica, Williams Brown, Zay Perry, and Marcus. That list has expanded. We love all of you for that. Unfortunately, when there is bad news, the news industry gets a little bit of a boost. So thank you all very much for your support. And until next time, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Sokoli, oh, минайте гори лісі доли, дзвін, дзвін, дзвін.